I knew my marriage was over the second my wife looked me straight in the eyes and lied without even blinking. Her voice soft and practiced as she said, "My mom's not doing well. I'm going to stay with her tonight." And the worst part wasn't even the lie itself. It was how normal she made it sound, like she had rehearsed this exact moment 100 times, and I was just now catching up to a story that had already been written without me. 10 minutes later, while she was in the hallway grabbing her coat, her phone lit up on the kitchen counter and I wasn't even trying to look. But the screen was angled just enough for me to see 6 words that didn't belong in a marriage like mine. 6 words that felt like they physically knocked the air out of my chest. "Can't wait to finally have you." I remember standing there with my hand still on the sink, water running over my fingers, trying to convince myself there was a version of reality where that meant something harmless, where I wasn't already 10 steps behind my own life falling apart. We had been married 9 years, together for 12, and I used to think that counted for something, like time itself could protect you, like routine meant safety, like shared calendars and grocery lists and framed photos on the wall were some kind of shield against betrayal. But over the last few months she had been changing in ways that were small enough to explain and constant enough to drive me insane. Sleeping with her phone under her pillow, turning it face down the second I walked into the room, changing her passcode after years of telling me she had nothing to hide. And every time I noticed, every single time, she would look at me like I was embarrassing myself and say, "You're getting paranoid," until I started apologizing for seeing exactly what was in front of me. When she came back into the kitchen, already dressed like she wasn't planning to come home, I asked her who texted her, and the shift in her was instant. Not fear, not guilt. Just this sharp irritation like I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. And she grabbed her phone too fast and said, "Why are you checking my messages now?" As if I was the one doing something wrong. And when I told her I saw the preview, she let out this short laugh and said, "It's Jenna. We joke like that. Not everything is about cheating." And the way she said that word before I even used it made my stomach drop so hard I actually felt dizzy. I asked to see the message, just to clear it up. Just to give her a chance to prove me wrong. But she pulled the phone against her chest and looked at me like I had just insulted her, her voice going quiet and wounded in a way that used to work on me every single time as she said, "I cannot believe you don't trust me right now. My mother is sick and this is what you're doing." And then she stepped closer, kissed my cheek like I was a child, whispered, "We'll talk when I get back," and walked out the door with an overnight bag I had never seen before in my life. I told myself I wasn't going to follow her, that I wasn't going to become that kind of man, but I lasted exactly 7 minutes before I was in my car, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys, keeping just enough distance to see her taillights while telling myself there was still time for this to make sense. Still time for me to be wrong. Except she didn't turn toward her mother's neighborhood. Not even close. She drove 20 minutes in the opposite direction and pulled into the parking lot of a hotel off the interstate like she had done it before. I was reaching for my phone to call her, to give her one last chance to tell me I was crazy, when another car pulled in beside hers, and the man who stepped out didn't even need to get close for me to recognize him, because I knew exactly who he was the second I saw the way my wife smiled at him. I froze in the driver's seat when I recognized him stepping out of that car. Because it wasn't just some random guy or a stranger I could reduce to a faceless enemy. It was someone who had been in my house, someone who had shaken my hand, someone who had sat across from me at dinner and laughed at my stories like we were on the same side of life. And I remember whispering out loud, "No, not him," like saying it would somehow undo what I was seeing. He walked up to her car casually, like this was routine. Like this wasn't the kind of moment that destroys people, and she didn't hesitate for even a second before opening her door and stepping out to meet him. I stayed low in my seat, barely breathing, watching them under the dull yellow light of that parking lot. And the worst part wasn't what they did. It was how normal they looked doing it. She smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in months. Not that polite, distant smile she gave me lately, but something lighter, something real. And when he said something I couldn't hear, she laughed, actually laughed, and reached for his arm like it was instinct. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands started to ache, thinking, that used to be me, and feeling this sick, hollow realization settle in that whatever we had, she had already given it away piece by piece without telling me. I wanted to storm out, to confront them right there in that parking lot, to demand answers like I still had the right to them. But something stopped me. Something colder, more deliberate, like I suddenly needed to see how far this went because part of me was still hoping there was some explanation that didn't end with me being the fool. So I stayed, watching them walk side by side toward the hotel entrance, not even trying to hide it, not even looking around. And right before they disappeared through those glass doors, he put his hand on her lower back like it belonged there, like he'd done it 100 times before. That was the moment something shifted in me, because it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just a weird text or a gut feeling I could doubt later. It was real. It was undeniable. And I realized I wasn't chasing the truth anymore. I was staring straight at it. I sat there for I don't even know how long, engine off, lights out, just replaying every conversation we'd had over the last few months. Every time she told me I was imagining things. Every time she made me feel small for asking simple questions. And it started to click together in a way that made me feel physically sick. Then my phone buzzed in my hand, and I actually flinched when I saw her name on the screen, like she could somehow see me sitting there watching her lie unfold in real time. I answered without thinking, my voice already shaking, and before I could say anything she said, "Hey, I just got to my mom's place. She's asleep, but I'll call you later, okay?" And the way she said it, so smooth, so effortless, like she was doing me a favor by checking in, made something inside my chest tighten so hard I could barely breathe. I looked up at the hotel doors she had just walked through and said quietly, "Are you sure that's where you are?" And there was a pause, just a fraction too long, before she sighed and said, "Why are you doing this again? I told you where I am. You really need to work on this insecurity." I almost believed her again, and that's the part that scares me the most. How easily she could twist reality if I wasn't literally staring at the truth. And before I could respond, I heard a faint sound through the phone, a man's voice in the background, low but unmistakable, and she immediately covered it up with, "My mom's TV is on, hold on." But it was too late. My heart dropped into my stomach as I whispered, "Who's with you?" And this time there was no immediate answer, just silence stretching between us, thick and heavy, until she finally said something that made everything worse. She didn't deny it. I sat there gripping my phone so tight my hand went numb, waiting for her to say something that would pull me back from the edge, some kind of denial, some kind of desperate lie I could cling to. But instead she exhaled slowly and said, "I don't know why you're making this into something it's not." And that calm, measured tone hit me harder than if she had just admitted everything outright, because it meant she was still trying to control the narrative, even now, even with me standing this close to the truth. I looked up at the hotel again, those automatic doors opening and closing like nothing important was happening inside, and I said, "I just heard a man's voice." And she immediately snapped back, sharper this time, "I told you, the TV is on. Why are you interrogating me like this?" There was something in the way she said interrogating, like I had crossed a line just by noticing reality, and I felt this wave of anger rise up through the shock, because I realized she wasn't just lying. She was trying to make me feel guilty for catching her. I swallowed hard and said, "I'm outside, Erica." And the silence on the other end this time was different, heavier, like the air itself had shifted. And for a second I thought the call had dropped until she whispered, "What do you mean you're outside?" And I answered, "I mean I watched you walk into a hotel with him." And I don't think I'll ever forget how quickly her tone changed after that. She didn't panic. She didn't break down. She got cold. "Oh my God," she said, and I could hear the disbelief dripping through every word. But it wasn't fear. It was anger. "You followed me?" The way she said it made me feel like I was the one who had betrayed something sacred, like I had violated her trust instead of the other way around. And before I could even respond, she kept going, her voice rising just enough to cut. Do you have any idea how insane that is? Showing up and spying on me like I'm some criminal? I actually pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it like it didn't belong to me, because somehow, in a matter of seconds, she had flipped the entire situation. I saw you, I said, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. I saw you with him. Don't do this. There was a pause, and then she let out this long, dramatic sigh, like she was exhausted by me, like I was the burden she had to deal with. And she said, "You didn't see what you think you saw," which was such a ridiculous sentence that it almost broke me. I laughed, but it came out hollow, like something inside me had cracked, and I said, "I watched you walk in together. What else is there to misunderstand?" "That doesn't mean anything," she shot back immediately, and I could hear movement now, like she was pacing, like she was already building her defense in real time. "He needed to talk, okay? He's going through something, and I didn't want to have that conversation in public. I was trying to be a good person, but of course you wouldn't understand that because you've already decided I'm guilty of something." The way she twisted it, the way she positioned herself as compassionate and me as paranoid, made my chest tighten so hard it hurt, because a part of me still wanted to believe her, even now. "Then come outside," I said, my voice dropping, steadier now. "If it's nothing, come outside and prove it." That was it. That was the moment everything hung in the balance, and for a second I thought she might actually do it, that she might walk back out and look me in the eye and tell me the truth, whatever that truth was. Instead, she went quiet again, and when she finally spoke, her voice was lower, controlled in a way that felt almost rehearsed. "I'm not coming outside," she said. "I'm not rewarding this behavior." I remember staring at the hotel entrance after she said that, like if I looked hard enough she might suddenly walk back out and undo everything. But instead, all I felt was this slow, crushing realization that she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was annoyed that I was interfering. I tightened my grip on the phone and said, "Rewarding this behavior? You're inside a hotel with another man and you're talking about my behavior." And she didn't even hesitate before firing back, "You don't get to twist this into something ugly just because you're insecure. I told you what's going on, but you'd rather believe your own narrative." That word narrative stuck with me, because it meant she had already decided what version of reality I was allowed to accept, and anything outside of that made me the problem. I stepped out of the car without even realizing I was moving, the night air hitting me like I'd just come up from underwater, and I said, "Then let me come up there. If it's just talking, if it's nothing, you shouldn't have a problem with that." For a second, I thought I heard something shift in her breathing, like maybe I had finally cornered her. But then she laughed, quiet and cold, and said, "Absolutely not. You don't get to barge into my space and create a scene because you can't control your emotions. My space, not our life, not our marriage. Her space." I started walking toward the entrance anyway, each step heavier than the last, and said, "You're my wife. This is my life too." And she cut me off instantly, sharper now. "No, what you're doing is crossing a line. You're embarrassing yourself, and honestly, you're embarrassing me." That hit harder than anything else, because in that moment it felt like she had already separated herself from me, like I was some outsider she had to manage, instead of the man she promised to stand beside. "I watched you touch him," I said, my voice cracking despite everything. "Don't stand there and tell me that means nothing." There was a pause, longer this time, and when she spoke again, her tone shifted just enough to feel dangerous, like she was choosing her words carefully. "You're reading into things because you want to find something," she said quietly. "You've been distant, suspicious, impossible to talk to for months, and now you're trying to justify it by creating a story where I'm the villain." I actually stopped walking at that, right there in the middle of the parking lot, because it hit me all at once what she was doing. She wasn't just denying it. She was rewriting everything, turning months of her secrecy into my fault, turning my questions into attacks, turning herself into the one who had been pushed into this. I felt this hollow laugh rise in my chest again and said, "So this is my fault now?" And she didn't even flinch. "I didn't say that," she replied smoothly, which somehow made it worse, But you need to take responsibility for how you've been acting. People don't just end up in these situations for no reason. That sentence echoed in my head like a warning I didn't want to understand. And I realized she had just admitted something without admitting it, like she was testing how much I'd accept. I reached the glass doors then, my reflection staring back at me looking like a stranger, and I said, "I'm coming up." And this time her voice dropped completely, almost calm again. But there was something underneath it I couldn't ignore. "If you come up here," she said slowly, "you're going to regret it." I pushed the door open anyway, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else, and as I stepped into the lobby, my phone buzzed again in my hand with a new message from her. It wasn't from her number. I stood there in the lobby staring at that message, my hands trembling so badly I had to steady my phone against my chest just to read it again, because it wasn't her name on the screen, it was his, and the message was simple, almost casual, like we were all just part of the same conversation. "You should leave before you make this worse." For a second, I genuinely couldn't process what I was looking at, like my brain refused to accept that the man upstairs with my wife had my number, that he knew who I was, that this wasn't just something happening behind my back anymore, it was something they were both fully aware I was standing inside. I felt my stomach drop as I slowly typed back, "How do you have my number?" And the reply came instantly. No hesitation, no attempt to hide anything anymore. She gave it to me. I actually laughed out loud at that, right there in the middle of the lobby, and a couple walking past me gave me this strange look like I was losing my mind. And maybe I was, because nothing about this felt real anymore. I raised the phone back to my ear and said, "He just texted me." And she didn't even pretend to be surprised this time. She just sighed like this was all becoming inconvenient for her. "Then you should listen to him," she said flatly. "Go home. We'll talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down." That was the moment something inside me snapped in a way I didn't expect. Not loud or explosive, just quiet and final, like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. "You gave him my number," I said slowly, each word feeling heavier than the last, and she responded without a trace of shame. "I didn't want this to turn into a scene, so yes, I told him who you were. I was trying to manage the situation." Manage the situation. I looked around that lobby, at the receptionist, typing away like nothing in the world was breaking apart 10 feet away, at the elevator doors opening and closing, carrying people up to rooms where their lives were probably still intact. And I realized I wasn't part of her life in the way I thought I was anymore. I was something she needed to handle, contain, control. I swallowed hard and said, "So what is he to you?" And for the first time since this started, she didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but not softer. "This isn't a conversation we're having like this," she said. "You're emotional, you're not thinking clearly, and anything I say right now you're just going to twist." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me, and said, "No, what you're doing is twisting everything. I'm asking you a simple question. Who is he?" There was another pause, longer this time, and I could hear faint movement again, like she had stepped further into the room, away from him, or maybe closer. I couldn't tell anymore. "You're my husband," she said finally, carefully, like she was choosing each word to avoid stepping on something fragile. "And that should be enough for you right now." I felt my chest tighten so hard I had to lean against the wall to stay standing, because she hadn't answered the question at all. She had just reminded me of a title that suddenly felt empty. "Is he more than a friend?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. And this time, the silence that followed wasn't just hesitation. It felt like a decision being made. I could feel it in that silence, the way it stretched just a little too long, like she was weighing something in her head, not whether to tell the truth, but how much of it I was allowed to hear without losing whatever control she still thought she had over me. I pressed the phone harder to my ear and said, "Just answer me." And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady in a way that made my stomach turn. "He's someone who actually listens to me," she said, And it wasn't loud or defensive. It was calm, almost reflective, like she was explaining something reasonable instead of dismantling our marriage in real time. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to process that answer, because it wasn't a denial. It wasn't even really an explanation. It was a justification, and I could feel anger rising up again, sharper now. "That's not what I asked," I said, my voice tightening. "I asked if he's more than a friend." She exhaled slowly, like I was exhausting her, like this conversation was beneath her somehow. "Labels don't matter right now," she replied. And that sentence hit me harder than anything else she'd said so far, because it told me everything without saying it outright. I let out this hollow laugh, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me, and said, "They matter to me." And for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her tone, not guilt, not regret, but irritation creeping back in. "This is exactly what I mean," she snapped, her voice sharpening again. "You're trying to corner me into saying something so you can explode and make this even worse. I'm not doing that with you tonight." I pushed off the wall and started walking toward the elevators, my reflection in the mirrored doors looking like someone I didn't recognize anymore. And I said, "You don't get to decide when this happens. You already made that choice when you walked in here with him." There was movement on her end, quicker now, like she'd realized I wasn't just going to stand there and wait for her version of events. "Where are you?" she asked. And this time there was something underneath it, something tighter, like she didn't like not knowing. "I'm coming up," I said, and I hit the elevator button before she could respond. "No," she said immediately. And there it was again. That edge in her voice, that shift from controlled to urgent. "You're not coming up here. I mean it." The elevator dinged softly, the doors sliding open in front of me, and I stepped inside without breaking eye contact with my own reflection. "Why?" I asked quietly, pressing the button for her floor. "If it's just talking, if it's nothing, why does it matter if I come up?" There was no answer this time, just the faint sound of her breathing, uneven now, and I could picture her in that room, pacing, thinking, calculating, trying to figure out how to stop me without saying the one thing she didn't want to admit. The doors began to close, and just before they shut completely, she said something that made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't ready for. "Because you're not going to like what you see." The elevator doors slid shut with that soft mechanical sound, and her words just stayed there in the air with me, echoing in a way I couldn't escape. "You're not going to like what you see." And I remember staring at the numbers lighting up one by one as the elevator climbed, feeling like each floor was taking me further away from the life I thought I had, and closer to something I wasn't ready to face. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale, hollow, like I hadn't slept in days, and I kept replaying that sentence over and over because it wasn't a warning to protect me. It was a warning to protect herself. "Then tell me now," I said into the phone, my voice low but shaking despite everything. "Save me the trip, just say it." But she didn't answer right away, and that silence felt heavier than anything she could have said. When she finally spoke, it wasn't defensive this time. It wasn't sharp or dismissive. It was something else entirely, something quieter, almost tired. "I tried to talk to you," she said, and I felt my stomach twist because I knew that wasn't true, not in the way she was framing it. "You stopped listening a long time ago," she continued, and I shook my head immediately, even though she couldn't see it, because that was the narrative again, the rewriting, the shifting of blame that made everything feel upside down. "I'm literally here," I said, my voice breaking a little. "I'm listening right now." And she let out a soft, almost bitter laugh. "No, you're reacting," she replied. "There's a difference. You only care now because you're losing control of the situation." That word again, control. Like this whole thing was about power instead of betrayal. Like I was some kind of threat instead of a husband trying to understand why his wife was in a hotel room with another man. The elevator slowed, the subtle shift in motion making my chest tighten as the doors prepared to open, and I felt this sudden, overwhelming urge to turn around, to walk out, to pretend I never followed her, because whatever was waiting on the other side of those doors was going to change everything in a way I couldn't undo. "Last chance," I said quietly, my hand hovering near the button panel. "Tell me the truth before I see it for myself." And this time when she answered, there was no hesitation at all. "I already told you the truth," she said, calm, firm, unshaken. "You just don't want to accept it." The doors opened. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound too loud. And I stepped out slowly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing off the walls. I walked toward her room number, each step heavier than the last, until I was standing right in front of the door, staring at it like it was something alive, something waiting for me. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door opened from the inside, and the man standing there wasn't just someone I knew. It was someone I trusted. I wish I could say I felt rage first when that door opened. Something loud and explosive that would make sense of the moment. But what I actually felt was this cold, hollow disbelief, like my brain refused to accept what my eyes were clearly seeing. Because the man standing there wasn't just a friend or an acquaintance. It was Mark, my best friend, the guy who stood next to me at my wedding, the guy who helped me move into our first house, the guy who used to sit on my couch and joke with her while I grabbed drinks from the kitchen. And I remember just staring at him, whispering, "You?" like it was the only word I could form. He didn't look shocked. That's the part that stayed with me. He looked tense, sure, caught, but not surprised, like this possibility had already been accounted for, like I was the last piece falling into place instead of the disruption I thought I was. Behind him, I could see her, standing near the bed, arms crossed like she was bracing herself. Not ashamed, not even apologetic, just ready. Ready for this version of reality where everything was already decided and I was the only one still catching up. "Hey," Mark said, and the normalcy of it made something inside me twist violently, because that was the same voice he used when he showed up to watch games or borrow tools, and I felt my hands start to shake again as I stepped forward slightly, not even realizing I was doing it. "Don't," she said immediately from behind him, her voice cutting through the air, controlled but firm, like she was managing a situation that had gotten inconvenient. "This doesn't need to get ugly." Ugly, like it wasn't already. I looked past him at her, really looked this time, and I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before, not guilt, not confusion, but distance, like she had already stepped out of our marriage emotionally long before tonight, and this was just the moment I finally noticed. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely holding together, and Mark shifted slightly, like he was about to say something, but she cut him off without even looking at him. "That's not relevant," she said, calm again, composed in a way that felt almost rehearsed. And I let out this quiet, broken laugh because of course it was relevant. It was the only thing that mattered to me in that moment. The timeline, the lies, how far back this actually went. "It is to me," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "Because I need to know how long I've been standing in a life that wasn't real." She sighed, like I was asking too much, like I was making this harder than it needed to be, and said, "You're focusing on the wrong thing." And that sentence hit me harder than anything else, because it meant she genuinely believed that. She believed the betrayal wasn't the issue. My reaction to it was. "There were problems before this," she continued, her voice steady, almost clinical. "You just refused to see them." I felt something in my chest collapse at that, because in her version of the story, this wasn't a betrayal. It was a consequence. Something justified, something earned. And I realized then that there wasn't going to be a moment where she broke down and admitted it. There wasn't going to be closure handed to me in some clean, understandable way. She had already rewritten everything to protect herself, and Mark, he just stood there, silent now, avoiding my eyes like that would somehow make him less involved. I looked at both of them, standing there in that room that smelled like a place I was never supposed to see, and I felt this overwhelming mix of anger, humiliation, and something worse than both. This deep, sinking understanding that I didn't actually know the people in front of me anymore. Maybe I never did. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to them, and said, "Okay," because I didn't trust my voice to hold anything else. And as I turned to walk away, she said one last thing that followed me all the way down that hallway and out of that hotel. Something that didn't just end my marriage, but completely reframed everything I thought I knew about it. "This didn't start with him," she said quietly.